All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College EWD 1000 Web Development Technologies course, I've been going through and creating a series of video presentations based on the Mozilla Developer Network Learn Web Development series. I am in the third part of this series, which is on learning to style HTML using CSS, and I'm in the fourth CSS module, which is on layout, and I'm down near the bottom of it talking about supporting older browsers. All right, it says there will always be visitors to a site who use older browsers or browsers that maybe don't support things like Flexbox and Grid. All right, this will always be the case as new features are developed. This article explains how to use modern web techniques without locking out users of the old technology. Every website is different in terms of its target audience. That's true. For example, if I'm going to create a site for AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, I believe that's what it stands for, it's going to be probably very textual in nature. It'll probably be a little bit more bland as far as its coloring, and it won't have a lot of videos or probably even a lot of images. On the other hand, if I create a gaming site for young kids, it's going to be a lot brighter colored. It'll probably have very little text and a lot of images, videos, etc. All right. So it says you should also consider the type of devices that people will use for your site. For instance, that if you know that most people who go to your site are going to be using a phone. Okay. Accessibility and people using assistive technology should also be considered. All right. The author says here, in my experience, developers are often very worried about the experience of 1% of users in an old version of IE while not considering the far greater number who have accessibility needs. So try not to forget about anyone. All right. Once you know that the browsers that come to your site, you can access the technology you want to use against how well it is supported, etc. You can use things like can I use, etc. It says look at the page for the grid template columns. At the bottom of this page is a table which lists the major browsers along with the version that began supporting it. Again, this is very similar to, like I mentioned to you, things like can I use. In fact, they're referencing it, and I've been talking about it for quite a while. All right, as it says here, the Can I Use site lists the majority of web platform features with information about their browser support status. Understanding the technology users have and the support for things you might want to use puts you in a good place to make your decisions. All right, key point here, as mentioned, support doesn't mean looks the same. Just as the same website will look different or potentially will look different in different browsers. All right. Even if you put in features and do things like, you use the modern technology, etc., even looking at something in the same browser but different versions of the browser can possibly look different. All right. And again, notice some of your users will have an older browser. Some of your users will be sight impaired and will have the content be read to them by a screen reader or be zoomed in, like this, basically, so that they're able to actually read it. All right. Supporting everyone means seeing a version of your content that is designed defensively so that it will look great on modern browsers, but will still at least be given a basic level for users of older browsers. And what's basic level? As it says, it comes from structuring your content well so that the normal flow of the page makes sense. You never know, who comes to your site, and especially, I've said this kind of thing before, especially if it is a site where you are providing a service for cost or you are selling a product. And I don't care if I'm selling something online. I don't care when you come to my site if you've got IE3 or you've got Edge or you've got whatever, as long as you're able to go in and buy my product. All right. But it says there is a middle ground between a plain HTML page and all the bells and whistles. All right, so we're going to talk about this stuff in here right now. So CSS specs contain information that explains what the browser does when two layout methods are applied to the same item. All right, so again, we've talked about legacy techniques in here, and it says in the example that they're showing here, we floated 3 divs so that they display in a row. Any browser that does not support the grid layout will see a row of boxes as a floated layout. A floated item that becomes a grid loses the float behavior, which means that by turning the wrapper into a grid container, the floated items become grid items. So again, as it says, if the browser supports grid, it will display the grid view. If not, it'll use the floated layout. So we're trying again here to be the best of all worlds, if at all possible. All right. Fallback methods. There are a number of layout methods that can be used in a way similar to the float example here. We've talked about using clear already, so I'm not going to go into that anymore. Remember, when you float, you can float left, you can float right, you can float both. All right, you can float none, and you can float inherit, to inherit from the parent. All right, display inline block we've talked about before. As it says, it can be used to create column layouts. If an item has a display inline block set, but then becomes a flex or grid item, the inline block will be ignored. Display table we've looked at. All right, items that have table layouts set on them, as it says, will lose this behavior if they become flex or grid items. Multiple column layout. For certain layouts, you can use the multi-col as a fallback. We've talked about this. We've talked about Flexbox. As it says, it has greater support than grid due to being supported by IE 10 and 11. For many layout tweaks in older browsers, you may find that you can give a decent experience by using CSS in this type of way. All right, some of the stuff that we've been working with previously. All right. Feature queries, as it says, they allow you to test whether a browser supports any particular CSS feature, meaning that you can write some CSS for browsers that don't support a feature, all right, and then check if the browser has the support. So in other words, we're talking about, hey, if you're a better browser, we're going to give you a better look and feel, a more modern look and feel. But if you don't have a more modern browser, we're still going to let you look at it. All right. Support for feature queries is very good across modern browsers. You should note that browsers that do not support grid also don't support feature queries. And that's the problem you're always going to run into. In older versions of Flexbox, you can find previous iterations of the Flexbox spec. All right. And as it says, there's a guide that'll talk about that stuff with you. All right. IE 10 and IE 11 prefixed version of grid. All right, it says IE 10 and IE 11 do not have modern grid support, but they do have a version of grid layout that's very usable. All right, this is very interesting, this whole idea. Let's look at this. Let's type in progressive enhancement. All right, it says it's a strategy in web design that puts the emphasis on web content first. It involves separating the presentation semantics from the content, with the presentation being implemented in one or more layers. So the idea with this is, do you want to start and suppose the user has everything and take things away? Or do you want to assume that the user has nothing and basically, depending on what browser, etc., they have, add things to it? So it says this puts the emphasis on content first. So it separates the presentation semantics out from the content. So you are getting a baseline. You are getting something that should work on every browser. Then you can go in and you can add more to it. It says this strategy is an evolution of a previous web design strategy called Graceful Degradation. All right. And it says the ability to maintain functionality when portions of a system break down rather, is referred to as graceful degradation. Now, we used to talk a lot more about this stuff. All right. So let's see. Here we go. It says you've already seen this. Well, graceful degradation is the practice of building your site functionality so that it provides a certain level of user experience for modern browsers and will degrade gracefully for older browsers. So you basically provide everything, but if the user has a later version of a browser, you start with everything and you work your way down. Progressive enhancement is similar, but it does things the other way around. With progressive enhancement, you start at a basic level that'll work on every browser, then build up based on what version of the browser the user has. Testing older browsers, as it says, with the majority of browsers supporting Flexbox and Grid, it can be reasonably hard to test older browsers. One way of doing this is to use something that says here, a tool such as Sauce Labs, as detailed in the cross-browser testing module. You can typically download emulators, simulators of older browsers to work on this stuff. And that's what they're talking about in here. All right. So all that's left is this fundamental layout comprehension assessment right here. We're going to take a very quick look at it, and then we'll be done with this particular lesson.